Hello there, very good evening and welcome to Government in Transition. I'm your host, Eddy Layne. Um, Joining you on this Monday evening. It is the 6th day of July and it is CARICOM Day. So I want to take the opportunity on behalf of the People's Progressive Party to extend CARICOM Day greetings to all Guyanese at home and to those of you who are joining us in the Caribbean as well. We want to extend CARICOM Day greetings to you. To my guests this evening, Brigadier Phillips, the Prime Minister-elect, and Dr. Frank Anthony, former Minister under the People's Progressive Party Civic, as well as a candidate of the PPPC for the March 2nd general and regional elections. Brigadier Phillips, Dr. Anthony, good evening, welcome to the program, and happy CARICOM Day to you both.
Thank you, Ed, and happy CARICOM Day to you and to our viewers.
Thank you very much, Eddy, and a happy CARICOM Day to both of you and to all our listeners, wherever they might be.
All right, I want to get straight into the program. We're celebrating CARICOM Day today at a time when Guyana is in a very, very peculiar position. Some may want to describe it as though we are in uncharted waters. Because of what has happened, Guyanese voted on March 2nd. We are way past 4 months since those elections, and we're still to have an official declaration. I mean, the world knows that the PPPC would have won the March 2nd general and regional elections. That was first revealed via the statements of poll which the PPP would have received from GCOM and subsequently posted. And that was reaffirmed from the recount exercise, which confirmed that the PPPC would have beaten the APNU-AFC by 15,416 votes. Nonetheless, we're still in a position now where the new government, the Dr. Irfan Ali's government, has not been able to be sworn in. And we have a situation where, as we celebrate CARICOM Day, the APNU-AFC is not missing an opportunity to beat up on CARICOM leaders, to beat up on scholars in the region, and to beat up on every single person in the Caribbean who are standing on the side of democracy. I want to start with you, Brigadier Phillips, the Prime Minister-elect. Your thoughts as we celebrate CARICOM Day and the situation Guyana is in, Guyana being one of the founding members of CARICOM. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak again. Both the PPPC and the APNU-AFC recognize the importance of CARICOM, especially at this time with this political impasse in Guyana. And none other than President Granger has mentioned that CARICOM is the most important interlocutor, as it pertains to the political impasse in Guyana. And of significance, we've had the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, who was the chair and came out strongly in support of democracy in Guyana. And equally, recently she handed over chairmanship to Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves, who is also a strong defender of democracy in our region. And he's on record since taking over, I think it was Friday, in one of his speeches, he made it clear that he will continue to carry out his duties in the tradition of Mia Mottley, and he will be a stout defender of democracy, including free and fair elections. And those are good, comforting words for us in Guyana, because today is day number 126, 126 days since we had our elections, and we're still awaiting GCOM's declaration of the PPPC as the winner of these elections. The whole of Guyana and the whole of the Caribbean and the world knew that we won these elections. By the 3rd of March our statements of polls that we collected from GCOM indicated after tabulation that we won these elections. Everybody know what happened after then with Mr. Mingo and his misconduct. However, we went to a recount, and the statement of the recount, the results of the recount, shows again that the PPPC won the elections. So we are anxiously awaiting the ruling by the CCJ come Wednesday, and as soon as possible, the declaration by the chairperson of GCOM. And we are confident that the declaration can only go one way. It will have to show the PPPC winning these elections, because we are aware that there are 460,000 valid votes, and no effort by the chief election officer to invalidate any of those 460,000 valid votes will be accepted by us and by the international community, especially by CARICOM.
Thanks, Brigadier. Dr. Anthony, I'll give you a chance to come in here.
Well, thank you very much, Eddy. As the Brigadier would have said, CARICOM is a very important partner to Guyana. And, you know, we have been an integral part of CARICOM. The institutions of CARICOM are also very important, not just to Guyana, but for the region. And you would have seen that a lot of those regional institutions have been called upon to respond to various things that is happening right now in the region. So for example, with this current pandemic, there are regional institutions that have been responding both in terms of security, in terms of transportation, in terms of being able to provide testing for countries that cannot, that do not have their own capacity. So these are important regional institutions that have been established and have been playing a very important role for the region. Another part of the what you might say, this regional set of institutions that we sometimes take for granted is the role that the CARICOM institutions would play in terms of governance and law. So in terms of governance, we saw that the CARICOM heads of government would have agreed to send to member states, whenever they have elections, teams to observe those elections. And in Guyana's case, before the elections and during the elections, and even a little bit after the elections, CARICOM had a presence in Guyana, along with other international observers. And then after we had this, as you call it, Brigadier, the misconduct by Mr. Mingo, you know, CARICOM then decided that they have to get another team in Guyana. But before that team came, you would recall that 5 of the heads of government came to Guyana, had discussions with the president and with the leader of the opposition. And out of those discussions was born an agreement. And that agreement basically said that we are going to have a recount of the votes of the elections. So this was a CARICOM initiative that came into being. But as soon as CARICOM, you know, brokered that initiative, we had a PNC operative and a PNC candidate, Yonette Moore, taking, you know, this thing that was agreed upon by both the president and the leader of the opposition and the CARICOM leaders. And Yonette Moore went to the courts and said, no. You know what? We cannot have a recount. You have to go and declare the elections with the fraudulent Mingo numbers. And so When it went to the court, it was thrown out, and we were able to proceed to have a recount. Now, this recount, a second team from CARICOM had to come in. And that second team expected to spend at a maximum 25 days in the country. It went on for more than 33 days. And so after that, you then had the results of the recount. Now, what was the results of the recount? Boxes were opened, the ballots were examined, and then it was tallied, and then we know what the numbers were. So for every single box where people voted, every one of those ballots were examined, and then they were tallied up. And out of that process, at the end of every region, when we finish every region, we generated something called a statement of recount. And that statement of recount clearly said how many persons voted in this region, how many of those votes were valid, how many were rejected, which means that they were invalid, and of the valid votes, how they were distributed by the parties. And then after all of that, the GCOM officials, the person responsible for the supervision of that region, then had to sign. The person responsible for the tabulation of those results had to sign. So you had all these GCOM officials signing, and then every political party that witnessed this recount process signed on. The only people that didn't sign this thing was the PNC, the APNU-AFC. They were the only ones. And then, so what we have, they are valid, what you might call statements of recount. And these statements of recount clearly state these are the valid votes. Now, one would have expected that at the end of this process, all Mr. Lowenfield had to do was to take these 10 statements of recount and add them up. But Mr. Lowenfield deviated from what is required of him. And so when he submitted his first report to the Elections Commission, what he did, he did, first of all, that tabulation, which was the correct thing to do. And it shows in that tabulation that the PPP won by more than 15,000 votes. But then he went beyond what he was required to do. And he then decided on his own to invalidate votes that were already counted in the recount process as valid. He, one man, decided that he can invalidate these votes. And so on the first occasion when he wrote that first report to the commission, he invalidated close to 270-something thousand votes. He had no right to do that. And he was not asked to provide an option. He was asked to count what was on the SORs. And so the chairman of the commission rightfully wrote to him and said to him, go and do a proper report and present it to the commission. Now, one would have expected that this gentleman would have then come back with only the tabulation of the SORs. Instead, he did, one of the weirdest things that you can think about. He discarded the tabulation completely. So now he's not even looking at the SORs that we spent more than 33 days compiling. He has pushed that aside and then decided to come up with his own figures. And in his own figures, he now has discarded 115,000 votes. Of course, you know, before that, they were trying to discredit the whole process of the elections. And the CARICOM people, who Mr. Granger said were the best interlocutors, they said that the recount process and the votes that were deemed as valid from this recount process, this process was a credible one. They didn't like that report because, and now you're not hearing them saying anything about the report. Initially, they start criticizing this part and that part. Now they've gone silent on the report, right? So that's dealing with, you know, CARICOM. When it's time to act on democracy, they send these teams out. And they have done a good job by coming to Guyana, witness this process, have written a report that clearly outlines what happened and what transpired in Guyana. But there's another institution here, another Caribbean institution that is called the CCJ. And they are also called to play their part. And we are signatories to that agreement that formed the CCJ. And so we should allow the CCJ to work. Unfortunately, the same people who have tried to claim victory in these elections, then when the numbers were against them, they tried to discredit the process, and any single leader or observer team that speak the truth about the elections, they go after them, right? So what you have is a vicious set of people who are attacking all and sundry. Whether you're a CARICOM leader, prime minister, a former prime minister, a head of an international team, a head of a local team, and now, whether you're sitting on the bench at the CCJ, right, the attack continues. And that is what we have seen. So CARICOM, I would say, have done a commendable job. But unfortunately, those who have lost power cannot give up power, or would not want to give up power, without criticizing and cursing and misbehaving, you know, as much as they could, so as to tarnish everybody else, but trying to let people see the kind of damage that they have done to this country. Because, you know, this type of behavior should not be condoned, and everybody has been criticizing it. So this small group of people have managed to damage this country's reputation far and wide around the world by their behavior, by their insistence that they have won these elections, by their attempts of trying to discredit an election and a process that has been very credible, that has been observed by everyone. This kind of behavior cannot be condoned. And those who are in authority in the APNU-AFC should start stepping down from their high horses. You know, it's sad.
You know, Dr. Anthony, you made the point. And what we have now is a situation where, look, these guys realize that Guyanese are rejecting their lies. Their lies are being rejected. This thing is quite simple. It is quite simple. The Constitution, I heard repeatedly in the APNU now trying to hold on to Lowenfield numbers and trying to give Lowenfield constitutional authority that he doesn't have. So they're holding on that the Constitution dictates, and I heard Ramjatan, a lawyer, saying that, you know, the Constitution gives Lowenfield the authority to on whatever he submits the commission is bound by that. So the lies that they talk in Guyana, they can't, it's nobody's buying it anymore. And the fact that the Lowenfield's role is clear, and the fact that the chair of GCOM has made the point already that GCOM cannot abrogate unto itself the powers of a court to investigate and to take evidence and all sorts of things. The Constitution is clear as to if you have issues with the credibility of an election, what is the process? Matter of fact, I should maybe, for the sake of reminding our viewers and reminding even the supporters of the coalition who are being misled, I should probably read what Article 163(1) of the Constitution says. And it says, Article 163(1), subject to the provision of this article, the High Court shall have exclusive jurisdiction to determine any question regarding the qualification of any person to be elected as a member of the National Assembly, whether functions, and B, whether functions of Elections Commission, determination of questions as to the membership and elections. B, one, either generally or in any particular place, an election has been lawfully conducted, or the results thereof has been or may have been affected by any unlawful act or omission. I'm going to read that along with what Section 5(1) of the National Assembly Validity of Elections Act says. An election petition shall be presented within 28 days after the election, after the results of the election, out of which the matter in question of the petition arose, are published in the Gazette under Section 99 of the Representation of the People Act. I read those two, despite they speak to different things, I read the two together to say the first thing is that all these concerns that they have to refer to Section 5(1) of the Validity of Elections Act, which says you can take all these things, you have 28 days after the official results of the elections are published, you have 28 days within which you can approach the High Court, not the Appeal Court, to address those concerns. Section 163(1) speaks to the High Court having exclusive jurisdiction and speaks to what are the issues to be addressed. And if you look at Article 163(1)(b)(1), 1B1 says, either general or in any particular place, an election has been lawfully conducted, or the results thereof has been or may have been affected by any unlawful act or omission. They're speaking to missing documents, which could be deemed an omission. They're speaking to entries not being placed in the poll book. That could be deemed an omission. They're claiming that persons who are not supposed to vote voted. Those are acts of are to be considered unlawful acts. But nothing in the law says you can take that to the court, more so the appeals court, even before a president is declared. So all these concerns that Lowenfield is trying to push in there for them to say that he would have to use these to justify or to come up with quote unquote credible and valid and credible votes are all elements that can be put nicely, whether they want to write it by hand or they want to type it, in an election petition, and to be taken to the High Court after a declaration is made. That is why the article speaks to published in the official Gazette, Section 5(1) of the Elections Amendment Act. So the fact of the matter is, these things that are throwing in here are not for now. They have to take them to in an election petition after. Secondly, all that they raised, the CARICOM report that we speak about, Dr. Anthony and Brigadier Phillips, spoke directly saying that these things that they raised can in no material way affect the results of the elections, because what APNU did is to make a whole host of allegations without presenting any evidence. So nothing that they presented, one, GCOM don't have the power to investigate and to disenfranchise anybody. Lowenfield has to work with this 460,000 plus votes that are deemed valid, that were validated from the recount. And any concern that the APNU would have had during that exercise or even now, they can take them to the court in an election petition.
Well, you know, Ed and Dr. Frank, in that same report, you know, the CARICOM report did mention that the APNU-AFC went on a fishing expedition, right? They used those terms, that they were on a fishing expedition. And they also mentioned at the end in the conclusion that the report, in the conclusion of that same report, that the report of the recount, the results of the recount, is credible grounds for us to use to declare the winners of the election. So wherever the APNU-AFC try, they're gonna lose. The writing is on the wall for them. They're trying to discredit the CCJ. And that's because the writing is on the wall there for them too. All of us may have listened to the hearing of the submissions, and many of us form our own opinions, but the CCJ is gonna rule on Wednesday, tomorrow. Sorry, on Wednesday. Today is Monday. But what is important is, I think the APNU-AFC knows fully well that whatever the ruling comes out of the CCJ is not going to be helpful to their cause. And that's why they're on a campaign to discredit the CCJ throughout the Caribbean, you know? And, you know, the CCJ should not be made to suffer this insult from the coalition. All matters before the court should be respected as such, and therefore all of us should not comment on the CCJ's likely ruling, you know, and criticize the court, and just wait on Wednesday, right? Wait on Wednesday, and then we will listen and we will hear the ruling. You know, as you quite rightly said, everything should have been well packaged. All the frivolous allegations and anomalies that they mentioned should have been well packaged and placed before the High Court in the form of a petition. And that could have only be done after, what is important, after a president is declared, after the elections, the results are declared and a president is declared. The law is clear on that. But we have to suffer from the APNU-AFC going on a campaign, and they're changing the narratives with every speaker. I've listened to one of their speakers only recently, this afternoon, talking to a foreign radio television station. And it's, you know, if I was not living in Guyana, I probably would have been convinced by this guy in his presentation. But we live here, we experience over the last 126 days the changing narrative of the APNU-AFC. And we know that they, the members and the leadership of the APNU-AFC, know that they lost this election. And they didn't have to go to a recount. They knew that they lost this election, as I quite rightly said before, since the 3rd of March, they knew that they lost these elections. And it will be difficult for them to maintain respect among their supporters now and at the end of this whole process.
Well, what is happening, though, before I bring you in, Dr. Anthony, is that, and you touched briefly, Brigadier Phillips, you talk about the speaker who've been lying. They've all been lying, and like I said earlier, the lies are no longer sticking in Guyana. People are not accepting it anymore because the people of Guyana know the truth. They have seen it. The recount was televised. You had an audio stream of every ballot, and you had a video stream of the tabulation of the results. So Guyanese know exactly what the results are. So they have now moved to the Caribbean, going to radio stations and TV stations in the Caribbean, trying to lie. For example, the same speaker, and I'm just giving this example, how deceptive and deceiving are these people. Said to the host of that same Caribbean, that regional program, that by the way, you know, I don't know why the PPP is creating all this noise about Lowenfield. They appointed Lowenfield. Lowenfield was appointed under them, deliberately not telling the host of the procedure where GCOM had to take a vote to elect, to renew the contract of Lowenfield. And Lowenfield was hired, yes, the PPP was in power at the time, but he didn't explain to the gentleman how the commission is constituted and so forth. So that is the kind of lies and propaganda. They're going into these places and trying to feed the people because people no longer are buying them in Guyana. The fact of the matter is, no matter how much you lie, you cannot change one thing, the ballots. You cannot change the ballot with lies. Dr. Anthony.
Well, you know, I mean, we will await the results on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. And I guess, you know, people have a lot of expectations out of what would come on Wednesday. But the reality is, whether the CCJ ruled that the appeal court did not have jurisdiction or not, it doesn't affect the next stage in the process, really. Because the next stage in the process is for us to go back to GCOM for a proper report with the valid votes that emerge out of the recount to be properly tabulated, and for that report to go to the commission and for a declaration to be made. So it's as simple as that.
Exactly.
So the next set of steps are very clear. But with everything else, you know, what is very clear to every citizen in this country, excepting those in the APNU and AFC, is that we can just try to imagine what other intrigues might be afoot here. But, you know, we have been very patient because every step that should have taken a day or two have been elongated. And yet we have maintained our, you know, patience. We have gone along, make sure whatever process they try to put in place, that we, you know, we go along with it. And in the end, you know, we emerge victorious from that process. And we anticipate that, you know, the next step, get the proper report in, and to have that computation of the seats for the National Assembly so that we can have that declaration and we can have, you know, a new government in place. Now, one of the interesting things that have come up is that the APNU has claimed consistently that it is only Lowenfield who can then decide on these calculations and all of that. But I recall there's a video with Mr. Alexander, a commissioner for the APNU, who has clearly stated that on one occasion, when he felt that something was wrong with how this tabulation was done in a previous election, that he, as a commissioner, decided that he is going to make the calculations right there and then in the commission. And they took those calculations and the commission endorsed it, and they went and they made a declaration. So if, and what that showed, because that ended up with a government being formed. So if there's precedent with a commissioner who has been there before and has the institutional memory of this, has said this on television, then if Mr. Lowenfield does not bring the right report, the commission as a body can easily sit, fix whatever report came that it's not correct, do the correcting, and then use that to make the declaration. And there's a precedent for that, according to Mr. Alexander. So really, going forward, the steps are clear. And, you know, it's just a matter of time. They've been playing for a lot of time. They've been trying to delay the process, but eventually time is running out. And the options that they have are very few. So eventually there will be 0 options remaining. And, you know, we'll have to move the process forward. So I think we are coming closer to that end game. And it's just a matter of time before we see this, this chapter come to a close and we have that declaration. It's my view that that would be happening shortly.
I believe, Dr. Anthony, when you look at the way in which the coalition is operating, you look at their actions, one, they've gone silent to a large extent. You know, they send a person here and there to try to spew some lie in the Caribbean, and they have these 2 guys sit, 2 very, very ill-informed young men on their TV whole day, all day, spreading misinformation, maybe because they're ill-informed about a lot of these things. Well, and apart from that, you have them there. These 2 guys are like 2 goons who are out there for the APNU-AFC, attacking everybody, attacking Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, attacking Prime Minister Mia Motley, attacking the CCJ, attacking the regional scholars who speak out on this matter, attacking the Private Sector Commission, attacking every single person, the ABCEU diplomats, everybody they are attacking. That is all they are doing. So they moved it to the next step today, where they decided to stage protests across the country. And I saw one man with a large pile of placards. Unfortunately, he had to hold that entire pile on the picket line because the people didn't show up. So he had maybe about 30 or 40 placards in his hand, holding all of them. The people didn't come out because the Guyanese people, like I said, have seen through the lies of the coalition, you know, and they did nothing for people over the last 5 years. But now that you've lost the elections, you want to use the people of this country to come out, to stand in the rain or stand in the sun in solidarity with you. You've lost the elections. What are they going to be doing out there?
No,
the Guyanese people are not stupid.
But more than that, they're endangering the people's life because with COVID, you're putting them in danger. So the people got good public health sense, you know. They're not going to come out and endanger their life, you know.
So that is where they're moving. They're moving now to protest the CCJ and to protest CARICOM, to say the CCJ shouldn't listen. The CCJ and CARICOM, the CCJ should only listen to when they go, right? They should only listen then. And Dr. Anthony, maybe we should make the point that people need to understand. I'm hearing this argument that the PPP is running to the CCJ and the CCJ has no jurisdiction and all sorts of things. I am not a lawyer. I don't want to infringe or to try to speak to the CCJ issue, but I want to make the point so that the people of this country can understand the reasons why the PPP moved to the CCJ. The first reason being that you have to prevent a precedent. We know that the Court of Appeal don't have jurisdiction in this case. And if you allow the Court of Appeal ruling to stand, then what's next? You will hear that the APNU going back to the Court of Appeal to tell them, ask them to instruct GCOM how to declare the results. And they're going to start using that court for all sorts of reasons. So one of the reasons why the PPP moved to the CCJ is to ensure that that particular matter is clarified. To ensure that a court doesn't have jurisdiction in this matter, as in the appeal court, that it is not allowed to assume jurisdiction and to set a precedence.
Well, I mean, Eddy, you read out part of the Constitution, and the Constitution is very clear. On electoral matters where you must go to the High Court. Now, yes, there's a very, very narrow, what you might say, interpretation for certain things that you can approach directly to the appeal court. Very, very narrow. And in my mind, I think that was abuse to try to go to the appeal court to get them to rule on something that they did not have jurisdiction on. Right? So they use that to get their toe in the door and then try to open the door. Right? And that is what we are trying to prevent. Now, they're now arguing that the CCJ does not have jurisdiction to review what happened in our appeal court. Well, what they're doing is deliberately misinterpreting what has been a rule of the CCJ. And that rule, when the CCJ was formed, basically said that if there's any member territory that, explicitly said in its constitution that their appeal court for this particular article or so is the final one, then, that's it. The CCJ would not intervene in those matters. But everything else, there will be the final court. Now, what is it that is being appealed here? It is not testing whether or not what the appeal court rule, right, about this particular matter. You understand? It is questioning whether or not the appeal court had jurisdiction. Which is separating. It's two different things. So we are not questioning the appeal court right to hear that narrow little bit of thing, because that is in the law. That is in our constitution. What we are questioning is whether, when the appeal court did that, whether they had jurisdiction.
Because we have to recognize, Dr. Anthony, I interrupt here. We have to recognize that when you look at Article 177.4 and the manner in which, how they separate the two, as though dealing with the president, you have to deal with the president separate from the National Assembly. And that is where the contention is. And while the appeals court has jurisdiction to hear matters relating to the qualification of a person to become president, and we know the parameters in which you examine qualification of the person to become president. What they're doing, what they did by going to the appeal court wasn't to question the qualification of a person to become president, but to question the validity of the elections, which is something that is for the High Court. And it's on that basis that the PPP has moved to the CCJ to say, look, the appeal court don't have jurisdiction to hear a case on the validity of the elections. That is something for the High Court.
Exactly.
So
you have to wait until you have a president. In other words, wait until the election is declared before you go to the court.
Yeah. But you see, one of the things that we have to understand with them is that they are trying to delay, and by delaying, they remain in office. We shouldn't discount that. That's the whole objective. If a declaration is made, that's what they're trying to prevent. If a declaration is made, you know, the PPP would be in office. And therefore they would be out of office. And they don't want to be in that position. So they're trying to string this thing out as far as they can go so that they can stay in office longer, right? And they're using all kinds of means to try to stay in office. So this is the ploy really. And we have seen the time that they have tried to gain this way, what they've been utilizing the time for. You know, appointing boards, spending money, giving away tracts, giving away land to people, selling out state assets. This is what is going on. So for every day that they buy, right, is a day lost for the Guyanese people, not just not having their legitimate government, but it's an opportunity where those that are in power are abusing that power, selling out the assets of the state and, you know, enriching their friends. So we are seeing more and more corruption as the day go by. So there's that level of desperation. Well, all right, you know, we lose power. All right, let me see what I can get, what I can grab kind of thing. And that is what is happening. And that is why this process needs to come to an end. Not only that the whole population is fed up, but it is what is being lost, what is being stolen from the population right now. It's not only the time, it's not only having that legitimate government in place, it is also what is being stolen on a daily basis by the people who are supposed to be guardians of these assets. And this is what we need to understand. And in addition to all of this, it's compounded by the health situation that we have. Look at what is happening in Morocco. Look how many people are testing positive. Look at the response. Where is the government response in helping those people? You're locking down the place. You're not providing relief to people, right? The next frontier for this is going to be with our borders with Brazil. And the rationale is clear because what is happening in Brazil? What are the precautionary measures are we taking? So we have this health crisis that is on our hands. We have a lot of people now who don't have jobs because of policies that this government has initiated. They're not giving anybody relief, right? You're putting a lot of people in poverty. You're impoverishing people almost on a daily basis. You're not assisting anybody. So they have really put this country in a mess, in a quagmire, and they can't get us out. You need a new government that would bring new thinking, that would bring the requisite skill and experience to take this country out of this quagmire and move it forward. And in situations like this, you also need your international partners. They have isolated everybody. All the international players have been isolated. And they don't want to participate with a government that is undemocratic. They're not going to help them. And so the government has isolated itself. They're there. And instead of them doing the decent thing, which is to concede the elections, they keep clinging on to power and trying to delay the inevitable outcome. So they're not helpful to the Guyanese people anymore. They're just looking after their own personal interests.
For themselves.
Yeah, and you know, when people elect you, they elect you to serve. Not to serve yourself, not to grab for yourself. They want people who are going to work for the interests of this country and its people. and not for a small elite.
Brigadier, I bring you in here.
Well, I agree with Dr. Frank, you know, but it's also important that we appeal to the people to continue to be calm. We're at the end of the road, and a new government will be formed very soon. Very soon, a new government will be formed in this country. Because with every passing day, as I mentioned, the support for the APNU-AFC coalition is getting less and less in our country. The lies that they've been telling to the people finally realizing. And as you mentioned, the protests that they plan for throughout the country today, I saw videos from Linden, I saw videos from on the East Coast and in Georgetown. And, you know, the people just did not come out as they expected to join the line and to practice social distancing and to collect the flyers and to lift the placards. The people were just not there in the numbers that they expected. The people want to see the back of the APNU-AFC coalition government. The people gave them 5 years, and they should have been out since last year after the no confidence motion. They should have been out. The writing was on the wall for them for a long time. Local government election 2016, local government election 2018, no confidence motion December 2018. Which government in the world is losing no confidence motion and then go win the election afterwards? I don't know. That's not the norm. I don't know what these guys expect, you know, some magic to happen at this stage after the elections results, after the recount results. They're still holding on and hoping that some magic will happen to cause them to remain in power. They will not remain in power. It is inevitable. They have to go. The whole world is telling them that they have to go. I know they don't like the language of the whole world, but that is the fact. The whole world is not against Guyana. The whole world is against the APNU-AFC for losing the election and holding on to power.
When you talked about magic just now, I remember Ramjutan yesterday sat with a straight face to tell a radio host that if the PVP is to be declared winner of these elections by some magical means, the PVP has already been seen as the winner. So, you know, but the point, I want to close here because we have just maybe about 3 minutes or so. I want to give you guys, both of you, 1 minute each to give your closing comments, because our schedule is tight. A movie has to start on MTV, so we got to wrap up in time for 9. But I want to say quickly that, and Dr. Anthony, you touched on it, what they have done is hurt this country significantly, hurt our diplomatic relations with the world by their actions. And we've seen and we heard what Pompeo said. Instructions were given to begin sanctions on individuals who will benefit and who are undermining the will of the people. But also, those things can have impacts on the population as well. So APNU-AFC, this small cabal, they're willing to put this entire nation at risk for their own selfish benefits. Dr. Anthony and Brigadier Phillips, I give you both a minute each to wrap up.
You know, when you spoke earlier, you were saying that you're seeing fewer and fewer of them. And, you know, it just leaves one to wonder whether some of those visas haven't gone already. But we leave that for another conversation. I just want to say that, you know, I want to commend everyone for their patience. We are getting closer to the end. And so far, you know, people have really behaved admirably. And we know that this is a battle for minds. And we know that people have been paying attention to what has been going on. I think throughout this process, if there's a good thing to look at or to learn from, I think people are more schooled now in the Constitution. They're more schooled now in the electoral process. And any future elections, we'll have a lot of experts around this country. So in future elections, I think, you know, everything would go much smoother and people would pay more attention and want to participate more wholeheartedly in the process. So I would like to end on that hopeful note that once the CCJ rules, the next step goes to GCOM, and then we expect that declaration to be made shortly thereof.
Brigadier Phillips.
Well, I just like to follow Dr. Anthony and ask the people to continue to be calm. CCJ is just for 48 hours from now. Okay, we have the ruling, and it is my hope that before the end of this week, or definitely before the end of next week, GCOM should finish their work, make the declaration, and we can have a government form so we can start, or I should say restart the development of Guyana, and to restructure the whole task force so we can be more effective in dealing with COVID-19. COVID-19, as you know, is on the rise again, even in countries that felt that, you know, it was going away. It's on the rise again in those countries. And we need to restructure our task force and to be very aggressive in dealing with this pandemic so we can save lives in Guyana. So people just be calm, continue to be focused and not be distracted by the coalition, and the inevitable will happen. The government, the new government formed by the PPPC, will be declared the winners of these elections and will start to bring relief to the people of Guyana.
Brigadier Phillips, Dr. Anthony, I want to thank both of you for joining me this evening. And to our viewers, we want to say thanks for being part of the program. We're going to be back here tomorrow evening to keep you updated even further as to what is happening in our country. Gentlemen, thanks again for being part of the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. Thank you, Ed.